Hi class, we are moving on to Module 5. We've just wrapped up Module 4. In Module 4 you should have completed your midterm journal assessment, and we looked at the institutions of corrections, a brief introduction to that. A couple things I want to hit on before I go into Module 5's overview. First, I've received several emails about the fill-in-the-blank questions. Please note, I will review all fill-in-the-blank questions, and that's set forth for the duration of the course. So you do not have to email me each week about the fill-in-the-blank questions. All of them will be reviewed at one time. So I typically sit down and do a couple modules at a time and review fill-in-the-blank. What it is Blackboard is case sensitive, spelling sensitive, case sensitivity, spelling, abbreviations, and Blackboard, it is a computer, will mark the answer incorrect. However, it may be correct, and that is you will receive full credit if it is indeed correct. So you do not have to email me about your fill-in-the-blank questions. I will not check it right then at that time when you email me. It will be checked collectively as a class. So I just wanted to remind everyone about that. Also, please make sure with your discussion boards, make sure you are responding. Some of you are starting to see your grades being reflected fairly low because you're not responding, you're not supplying discussions with substance. Again, a response is not I agree or I enjoyed reading your article, but something that is thought-provoking or engaging is what I am looking for on your discussion boards. So those are just a few reminders I wanted to give you about the course there. So going into Module 5, Law and Crime. Well, Law and Crime, one of my favorite subjects to teach, Law and Crime. This chapter gives us a nice introduction of our legal system here in America. It starts off with the foundation of where our common law has derived from in England. It talks about the Code of Hammurabi, Lex Talionis, which is an eye for an eye. So if you do to me, I'm going to do to you. And that's extremely important because that has pretty much set the foundation in our criminal law setting, or our criminal law proceedings, if you would say. A lot of things have derived from there, hence why the trip that we are doing with the criminal justice program is actually going over to London. We're traveling to England to look at some of those things. So law. What is law? In your book it starts off about the different types of law that we have, how our laws derive. If you look on page 110 in your book, it first starts talking about the U.S. Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, right? Our Constitution is what lays the foundation down for everything. Our articles, our amendments, how our government will essentially operate. Our Bill of Rights are in there. So that is the supreme law of the land. That trumps everything. Then we go forth and we talk about some administrative laws. Administrative laws are specific laws to specific indices, such as OSHA, the FDA. For example, when you're going into restaurants, they have certain laws they have to adhere to, certain policies they have to go by. And then you have federal laws, which are drafted by Congress. In Washington, D.C., we have Congress, which is the House of Representatives, as well as the Senate. And once they pass the law, it's effective, it's applicable to all 50 states. You also have what's referred to as state law, which we have our state capital in Raleigh. We have the Capitol building there, where we have our North Carolina senators and our North Carolina House of Representatives who pass law that is applicable only to the state of North Carolina. So actually October 3rd. So one law that just went into effect here in North Carolina, effective October 1st, is police body cams and the cams in the vehicles, police cars, are no longer considered public record. So if you've been pulled over, if you had any type of interaction with the police, before it was just easy to view and access those videos because it was public record. But now, effective October 1st, you have to actually go to the respective chief law enforcement officer. So if it's the sheriff, if you were doing with the sheriff's department or chief of police, the respective head law enforcement officer for that agency has the determination to say whether they will release the video to you or not. If it is ruled that they will not release the video, you then have to petition the court, which, in the turbulent time that we're going through right now with law enforcement, it's pretty peculiar, you would say, that the state of North Carolina just recently enacted that law. Now, that law was already drafted prior to the incident that happened in Charlotte. It just was not scheduled to go into effect until October 1st. But again, that's just an example of state law. An example of federal law is one of the laws that they recently passed dealing with overtime and what workers could pay. The dollar amount, and when you have to pay overtime to an employee, that's something that was federal. Federal common law. Federal common law comes from our Supreme Court, often referred to as legislating from the bench. Once the Supreme Court has made a ruling in the case, it sets what's called precedent, which is pretty much law, is what we have to abide by. One of the cases, or one example is that, is the same-sex marriage. Now, prior to the ruling from the Supreme Court, remember, states had sovereignty over that issue. Some states recognized same-sex, some did not. Well, once that went to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, then that essentially made same-sex legal in all states, and you have to abide by it. Same thing if you go back historically. If you look at Roe versus Wade, when you talk about abortion, or if you look at Plessy versus Ferguson, any of those cases, once it goes to Supreme Court sets the precedent. That's why Supreme Court is extremely selective on cases that they would hear. Thousands and thousands of cases are appealed to the Supreme Court, but only a very small amount are actually heard from the Supreme Court. And then you have city and county law, that's such as your building construction standards, your municipal laws that you would refer to as that. So when we talk about law in cases, you have two types. You have criminal law and you have civil law. Criminal law is essentially the violation of criminal federal or state statute. The case is being brought forth by the state or the government towards an individual. Civil law is usually referred to as a private wrong, and that's comprised of a citizen, personal wrongdoing trying to be rectified. So understanding that, you have the plaintiff and the defendant. You want to be able to tell me what the plaintiff is, who the plaintiff is, or their role in the court, and the defendant, which I think is self-explanatory. The defendant is probably trying to do what? Defend themselves. So in criminal court and criminal law and civil law, you have what's called the burden of proof, which is the test that must be met to find someone guilty. So in criminal law, you have what's called beyond a reasonable doubt. So it is up to the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person on trial has committed that crime. As the defense attorney, essentially, I am trying to place just a little bit of doubt, or not let the prosecutor meet one element of the crime, and then you should not be able to find someone guilty, right? Because you have a little doubt. You're a little skeptical if that happened. Civil law, contrary, is actually preponderance of evidence. So it's like 50% or more than 50% of the evidence shows that this person basically is guilty of the crime. On page 113, it gives you a nice little diagram going side by side of the different civil and criminal law. One thing to know, punishment in a criminal case, there's a rate. It could be monetary, it could be incarceration, probation, but there is. However, in a civil case, it is typically only monetary. Only monetary compensation will be the punishment rendered in a civil case. The classic case to look at, and your book does hit on that, is the O.J. Simpson case. When you look at in criminal court, although he was guilty, a side note, in criminal court, O.J. Simpson was found innocent, right? Johnny Cochran and his team did an excellent job planting doubt. You had the police officer there. A lot of his credibility came up. Questions of his credibility, whether he had some racial issues came up, how the scene was processed and secured. A lot of things came up that placed doubt whether you could say 100% that O.J. Simpson had committed that crime. So they were not able to prove, the prosecution was not able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense did a great job placing a little bit of doubt, which ultimately resulted in an acquittal for O.J. Simpson. However, you take that same case, and the Goldmans then sued O.J. Simpson in civil court. Now, the preponderance of evidence, 50% or more, suggested that yes, O.J. Simpson was guilty. So he was found guilty. What did he have to pay? Millions of dollars to the family. The irony to that case is, what did O.J. do subsequently? He wrote a book. If I did it, this is how I did it. And guess who actually had to get the royalties from the book? The family. So you write and publish basically, essentially, maybe a confession saying, if you did it, this is how you did it. And then the revenue and the royalties from that money is what is used to pay your punishment or your compensation to the people who sued you for that. So that's a irony to the O.J. Simpson case. But that case actually highlights the two, a criminal and a civil, one being found innocent in one and guilty in another. So understanding that civil is a wrong, a personal, trying to correct a personal wrong or personal injury. And essentially what I tell people is you can pretty much sue for anything. If someone comes to your house, yes, you can sue. You can sue them if they slip. If you go to someone's house, they fail to shovel the sidewalk or something, you fall down, you can sue. Now, doesn't mean you're going to win, but you definitely can sue. You have negligence, recklessness, all type of things that you can sue under for civil. Essential elements in the criminal. You have what's called mens reas and actus reas. Mens rea and actus reas. Those two must be present when you're talking about a crime, and those are essential elements there. So make sure you understand that when you talk about mens rea, is basically your mind, your mental state. Mens rea, your guilty mind, right? I can't convict you of something that you thought. So you thought about killing someone, right? You thought about it, but did you have the actus reus? Did you carry it out? Can you be convicted of just thinking? So you have mens rea, which is the guilty mind, and then you have actus reus, which is the guilty action of actually carrying that act, the act of actually doing that thing. So you need both elements in the crime. Okay, offenses and definitions. Your book goes through offenses. One thing to understand is you have different categories of crime. You have crimes against a person, crimes against a property, and one thing that is often confused is the word robbery and rob. And understand that robbery, if you look on your page, if you look on, what page do we want to go? On page. Trying to find it to direct you. Okay, page 122. Robbery, which is actually a crime against a person. A lot of times you hear people say, "Oh, my house was robbed." Robbery is a crime against a person when someone takes something. So, in the news, which I just read today, what's her name? Kim Kardashian in Paris was at. They did essentially probably home and a burglary and a robbery, but they tied her up. No, they didn't take it from her. They tied the stuff up. But it didn't say, they used the word robbed, but it didn't say if they took it from her or if they just entered into the house and did it. But she was there, and you can get into home invasion and all kind of other different things. But understand, when you talk about robbery is a crime against a person, not the home. So your house cannot be robbed, right? Somebody cannot rob your house because the house is what? A property. So your house would be burglarized. So it goes through, it talks about the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor. Very important things to understand, and the punishment for a misdemeanor and a felony. Now, does that mean that if somebody is charged with a misdemeanor that they may not have been incarcerated more than a year? That's a good question to look at. Remember, I didn't say convicted, I said charged. So I would encourage you to look at that. If someone has been charged, does that mean that they would not have been incarcerated for more than a year? The difference between a felony and misdemeanor is with the time that you can serve. Once you've been convicted, the punishment for a misdemeanor is punishable up to what? And a felony is this plus what? And your book gives you that answer. And one case to look at with that is, if you remember the rapper or someone, I think it was T.I., and he was sentenced for, I think it was a gun charge or something, I don't remember. But it was a felony, and they gave him a year and a day. A year and 1 day was his sentence. And understanding why that was actually done like that. The book also goes in to talk about the difference between murder and manslaughter, malice, intent and motive, and then it talks about defenses. Understand one thing I want to quickly go over when we talk about justification defenses. Justification is something you really want to look at, because a lot of people always say self-defense, but legally and the legality behind self-defense, you really need self-defense is actually pretty challenging to prove. So understanding those different excuse defenses, justification defenses, basically different types of defense that someone can put forth as a defendant. So I told you, when I am doing my lecture, sometimes the phone will ring. I won't re-record, so you heard the phone ring there. Some other questions back there that I want to look at. What is the difference between criminal law and civil law? I think you should be able to understand that. How would you define the importance and the contributions of mens res and actus reus in our legal system? Why is that important to understand the difference between that? So this chapter really supplies the foundation going into what we're talking about with our system, our legal system. And it's very important and interesting to understand our legal system, how it came about, and understanding state statute, federal statute, understanding the Code of Hammurabi and what the importance was behind that. And remember, Code of Hammurabi is based on Lex Talionis. What is that? The eye for an eye, going over that. Civil law, again, the plaintiff must prove the case beyond what? The plaintiff, the person bringing forth the case, must prove it beyond preponderance of evidence. You want to understand the burden of proof is the legal test. So under burden of proof, then you have to say, if I would say, what is the burden of proof in the criminal case? The burden of proof in the criminal case, you must prove beyond a reasonable doubt. What is the burden of proof in the civil case? Preponderance of evidence. That's how that's going forth with that. The person who brings forth a lawsuit against someone is what are they called? Are they the defendant? No, the defendant is the person that's actually trying to defend themselves. It's the plaintiff that's bringing that forth. Laws that are enacted by state. Remember, we talked about state legislative Congress, and then we talked about U.S. Congress. And those laws that are enacted are statutes. The North Carolina state statute, is where you can find all of the laws applicable to the state of North Carolina. Remember, and that state law varies from state to state. Each state we have our sovereign state sovereignty. Each states are granted by our Constitution state sovereignty, where states are allowed to make their own laws. But which law trumps all of that? Supreme Court law will trump that once the Supreme Court is ready. Remember, be able to understand mens res and actus reus. Example of a felony. What's an example of a felony? What's an example of a misdemeanor? So actually being able to tell me some of those examples, specific examples of crimes. And then talking about the different types of law, which I didn't go into a lot here. We're talking about procedural law. What's an example of procedural law? Substantive law. Criminal law we talked about. Civil law we talked about. What else did I hit on? Administrative law we talked about. But looking at the different types of law, what that is something that you want to be able to do. Then I'm looking over some of the stuff I want to make sure you highlight. Definitely looking at that evolution or the foundation from the England side, what they've contributed. The major difference between civil and criminal matter is the penalty. Ultimately, yes, because remember, civil law, you're not going to be sentenced to incarceration. For civil law, it's monetary compensation. So this was just a brief overview of our chapter 5, laying the legal foundation down. Again, feel free to contact me if you have questions about it. I just try to go over to bring a person to some of the stuff that we're talking about, because of course you can read it, but I like to bring a person to it. I think the chapter is probably a pretty easy read to read, really looking at the difference between murder, first degree murder, second degree murder, manslaughter, then voluntary manslaughter, and involuntary manslaughter. Now, I don't assign this in this class, but in my criminal law class, one thing that is interesting to do is if you pull up North Carolina state statute, just to know for the state you live in, and look up how North Carolina defines murder, manslaughter, and the difference between them. Look up some of the North Carolina state statute and just pull some of the laws to just read them, because a lot of times we don't read the law. We don't know until it's affecting us personally, right? Then that's when we pull it out and want to look at it. But remember, anything that you've been charged for can be found in the North Carolina state statute. Trying to think if there's anything else I need to go over. I know this is a pretty long video. I hadn't came on in a while. Just remember, fill in the blanks. You do not have to email me about filling the blanks. They will be reviewed, and that is indefinite. So throughout the course, they will be reviewed. So even this week or if you next week, you don't have to email me. In chapter 5. I'm sorry, not chapter 5. Well, yeah, it's essentially chapter 5. In module 5 this week, I'm looking over as we're going through. You have your journal. You have your journal quiz this week. Your video quiz, your self-assessment. Remember, with your video quiz, your videos are also posted right there before you actually answer the question, so you can review them again. You get to review the video quiz actually twice. If you have any other questions, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I will talk to you guys soon. Have a great day.